Hey everybody, it's Erik Torenberg, co-founder, partner of Village Global, a network-driven venture firm. And this is Venture Stories, a podcast covering topics relating to tech and business with world-leading experts.
Hey everybody, we're now accepting applications for our Network Catalyst Accelerator program. Founders in our program have gone on to raise money from Lux, Spark, A16Z, Slow, First Round, SUSE, Homebrew, Mavron, Obvious, NFX, Signalfire, and many more. Learn more and apply at villageglobal.vc/network catalyst. Well, we are very lucky to have Andreas Klinger. Andreas Klinger is a former founding team at Product Hunt, head of remote at AngelList, was at CoinList in between, and now is his own fund, Remote First Capital. Andreas, thank you so much for spending some time with us today.
Hey, thanks for having me.
There's this great Dave Chappelle clip about Ja Rule in the time of crisis, 9/11. Andreas, have you seen this clip?
No, I don't think so.
Basically saying that we all ask for celebrities like Ja Rule is this like washed up rapper. He's pretty good. I don't mean to denigrate him, but everyone always wants to know what celebrities think in time of crisis. And the joke is like, why do we care what Ja Rule thinks about 9/11? Like he's a musician. And so Andreas, I ask you, what's going on with coronavirus? What's your hot take? This is asking the celebrity about. I'll narrow the question a little bit. Obviously, coronavirus is way bigger than remote work, but does this merely accelerate what was already going to happen and just make it quicker, or does it change the fundamental structure of how we were thinking about it?
Yeah. So first, as an expert for medical stuff and virus, because I read the New York Times yesterday, like a short article, I think a worldwide deadly pandemic is a bad thing. That's my professional expert opinion. I don't know much more about this, a part of that. So that's like, if you want, that's as much as an expert opinion I can give on that topic. The situation we are in is kind of weird because, a lot of people work more remote now. Not so much, it's like everybody's forced to do it. Everybody's forced to do it from 0 to 1 within 1 day. Everybody has kids at home if they have kids, and everybody has like really bad work from home setup where they just constantly have back pain or sit on the couch for half a day, So in reality, this is not so much about remote work. It's much more about emergency work from home setups in a way. And that being said, all of that with a big disclaimer that we are the few lucky ones that actually have the opportunity to do that. And there's a lot of people who have jobs where it's like impossible to bring them remote, at least yet, So I'm personally think like a part of the fact that I think it would be nice not to have a pandemic in general, I also think it won't create that much of a positive impact on remote work than we think right now, compared to any other economic crisis, because a lot of people will also have very negative experiences with remote work in general right now, and like a lot of stressed experience. We'll see that companies going down because of like this kind of forced setup, So it's kind of like a double-edged sword. I personally, I'm not, let's say, it sounds stupid, but I'm not excited to have a global deadly pandemic right now.
Yeah. Are there new startups that you are sort of considering for investment, or that you're seeing pop up as a result of this, or how's that remote work startup ecosystem evolving?
Yes and no. Like as an investor, VC personally, not so much, because I don't think it's a forcing function for a lot of startups right now. Like if you have a somehow good enough idea, now a lot of people will try it. This doesn't make your ideas more sticky or better. You just have like no more traffic right now. So if you don't make the traction now, you will never make it. And maybe that's good, right? In reality, though, I talk to a lot of startups that now have the traction that they didn't have like 3 months ago, but the fundamental business behind didn't change. So it's still not a good venture case. It's maybe now a good case for angels to jump in, help with money, and then later on get dividends, But it's not a good classic venture capital case because A, hopefully the pandemic is not happening for forever. And B, it's still not the team that came up with the really big game-changing ideas, and it's still not the product that was this game-changing idea. So I have a ton more meetings, but I don't invest faster than I did before. That's currently my stake.
And regarding the negative experience, I mean, you're particularly a fan of co-working space, right? Or people getting in the same place if they're in the same region, but just more distributed work, or talk more about how that's different than sort of the current work from home setup that people have.
Yeah. Like I personally don't like working from home, which is weird if people associate your stuff with remote work. I believe the best setup you can have is like rent a small office with like 4 or 5 other remote workers, friends, and work from there. Doesn't need to be people in the same company. Maybe it's even better if they're not in the same company, because then you can rent about the idiots in your company, maybe, But in my experience, this is a more professional separation. It's like just a clearer boundary between private and professional. I personally enjoy that more than working from home. And I also could imagine this in the long run to become a default state for a lot of remote workers that live in, like, I would say, cities or hubs, where like having a flat that's big enough is just not reasonable, or maybe they just don't want it. I don't see how you can make this a venture scalable business personally, because it's like, what do you actually offer as a product? But I can see this as becoming a default pattern for a lot of people.
Yeah. So a lot of people in OnDeck right now are going to start companies or starting companies, thinking about starting companies. What are the frameworks that they should have in mind in terms of whether or not they should start remote? To what extent, what part of the team should start remote? How should people, companies forming now, not just in coronavirus, but in the next 6 months to a year, be thinking about building remote?
So right now, I recommend starting remote, just for the safety of everybody. So like there's a few misconceptions. For example, that you cannot do early stage as a remote team. I strongly disagree. A lot of people think of remote as like a binary concept, like you are remote or you're not remote. It's easier for you as a mental model to think of it like it's on a almost like 2x2 or like an two axis. One axis is like how close are you to the next hub of your team, and the other one is how distributed is the time, how distributed across time zones is a specific team you work in. So a company has multiple teams, and your specific team doing for example, mobile engineering is like only in one time zone, and that's fine, but like none of you is close to any of the hubs of your company or the regions, the cultural centers of your company. For a remote team, for a startup, like starting out right now, it's similar. So like much more the time zones will become the problem than actually working not in the same place. I personally think there's a lot of value to actually meet to discuss stuff. A lot of discussions are actually more productive online, which is a conception that most people don't have because they assume brainstorming in a room is easier and better. In my reality, in my experience, it's a lot of complicated discussions work better in documents, and additionally have meetings in person if you need them. So that's how I think about this as like a structure. Personally, I would recommend early stage teams to meet in person just to get like a lot of the nuanced discussions around pivots and product fit, like that is usually easier in person, but it's not mandatory. So I don't think that the current cohort right now has any major disadvantage to previous cohorts of OnDeck.
Yeah. Are there certain types of companies that are better suited to be remote than others? Consumer enterprise?
Yeah, it's the easier it is to get your team to be making autonomous decision, the easier it is to do this distributed. The reason is quite obvious, because if people can make decisions on their own, they don't need to ping somebody else for like feedback. You don't need to micromanage them that much. You can solve this or fix this by having better processes and better clarity, better prioritization, better decision making, blah, 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 all these management principles, but the reality is still true. And I think because of that, a lot of the early big remote teams are all like developer-centric products, because developers just knew kind of how to make decisions and went ahead, And now we get to the point where like remote work becomes normal enough and experienced enough that like, different kinds like form. But it's still, if you have a big separation between the knowledge of the person actually implementing and the knowledge of the person talking, for example, to customer, this is a communication bridge that you have to close, no matter if you're co-located or not, but it's easier if you're co-located. So that's how I would, as a mental model, think about this.
So Product Hunt maybe had the best of both worlds in the sense that it was sort of distributed, but you guys were all near each other, that you could meet in Europe, and it was the sort of engineering team that was distributed, and then the community team was all in one place. How do you think about, is your take that it has to either be all distributed or all in the same place, or how do you think about that?
So personally, I think about like this. You want to have, I think somebody's just mentioning this, like events on like have a time zone overlap of like 5 hours roughly, and that usually means West Coast, including Latin America, to East Coast Africa is like a good, Eastern Europe and Africa. This is kind of like a time zones that roughly work. If one group gets up early and the other group stays up later, and that's one of the core things. For example, the engineers in Europe never met in person in Europe. Like we only met in America anyway. So it doesn't matter too much. It's much more about this time zone or whatever, because I think you can have enough meetings in a day if you have 3 to 5 hours of overlap and just schedule those meetings at that time. That's enough. And everything else you can do for documents and all this kind of stuff. I would be careful with having a completely asynchronous setup early stage in the product, because it's a lot about nuances and details and all this kind of stuff. So if you consider, for example, having an engineer in Australia and another one in Europe and another one in the Philippines, you will have a lot of problems with like actually managing meetings. And I would just like stay away from that in the beginning. I don't know if you remember, but we had early on an engineer in Australia for iOS who was amazing. He was like designer plus engineer, just like power machine, amazing person. But we struggled so much setting up the meetings and like just iterate fast enough on the iOS app. And early stage, this is just important to do. So we back then actually discontinued with him because of that.
Yeah, Jono, I remember. What are some of the failure modes that early stage sort of remote or distributed teams face, and best practices to address them, or unique challenges to distribute?
Yeah, I think the common thing that most people mention is just have complex discussions in docs instead of in person. So if you have a complex problem, you want to deconstruct a complex problem in a text, and then have people read that and comment inline, and just give feedback on that. Because that's just easier than having 2-hour-long Zoom call where everybody's literally dying because it's, oh my God, I cannot watch this person talk anymore. So that's, in my experience, the most important one. In reality, though, a lot of people, especially now, over-index on best practices around remote work. I think this is complete BS. Remote teams have like years to optimize. And if you optimize your own productivity as a team for years and your own personal productivity for years, you have very strong opinions how shit should be done, right? But for you, when you start out, do what works for you, and when it stops working for you, do something else, period. Like, don't overthink this. Like, you don't win by having the most amazing asynchronous communication tool that you internally use, or like the most amazing whatever. There's certain inherent differences around not being in the same place, and just try to be cognizant about them and address them. I know a lot of remote teams that do daily stand-up video calls, and I know a lot of remote teams that hate those things like to the bone. Both is fine. It depends on your team. I personally think the larger the team gets, the more experience the team gets with remote work, the harder it is to do this kind of stuff, but doesn't mean that your team shouldn't do it. So I would just do, like in the beginning, daily stand-up video calls to get everybody in the zone of focusing, and get a routine into those people in an early stage. And there's a lot of things where, like, most of the best practices you will read around remote work, read them, try them, whatever. Those won't make or break your business. What will make or break your business is decision-making, and focus on that.
How should hiring distributed or remote be different than if you weren't remote or distributed? What new practices or different approaches might you have to consider?
Yeah. For context, like we built at AngelList, AngelList Jobs, which is essentially the largest job board for startups and the largest job board for remote jobs to startups. So you have different problems on the candidate and the company side. Good teams have the problem they get too much inbound. If you have that problem, it's already a good problem for you. So let's not worry about this for now. The bigger problems you have is it's for you really, really hard to evaluate international CVs. It's really, really hard for you to evaluate international talent. There's cultural differences. Like if you talk to an engineer in San Francisco, holy shit, this person can talk about tech. That person knows their shit. That person is amazing. And then when you actually get this person to program, you're like, wait, are you a programmer? Because I'm not sure anymore, right? So there is cultural differences. If you talk to a person in Eastern Europe, there's a high chance that this person is super reserved and like just doesn't want to lose face in the first interview. If you talk to people in India, there's a very different cultural bias. If you talk to people in different parts of Africa, parts of Latin America, like different cultural biases that you are not aware of, also like your own biases. So you look at the CV, you don't know the companies, you don't know the universities, you have no idea about anything there. You talk to them and you read them most likely a little bit wrong, So what are you left with? And in my opinion, what you should focus on is as quickly as possible get to real work. I highly recommend contract to hire. And I think everybody in this Zoom call has good experience with contract to hire. Get a specific project, get this project in the hands of like this one candidate you think is interesting. Ideally, get this candidate through somehow network recommendation. Early stage, you can do that. Give them this little project, do it together with them. If it works, move on. Don't overthink your early stage hiring process. In that case, a lot of people say it's super important who you hire. I fully agree, but nobody tells you how to do good hiring. And it's so hard to interview people like really good. So in my opinion, what I would do early stage and also later stage in remote team is check if you can work with this person, talk with this person, get them real work, make sure the rest of the team likes them and like can work with them and wants to work with them. And afterwards, like as I have usually the ultimate check, which is like, do I personally think this person is better than me in what they like as an engineer? Like I'm an engineer myself and I only hire engineers where I think I want this person on the long run to lead parts in our company because that's early stage what's going to happen. Like that's what something I do. You might not need that, but like get real work as quickly as possible in their hands.
Say more about some of the stuff that you did at Product Hunt that really worked, because you hired some of the engineers who, are the best engineers at AngelList today and are still there, 4 or 5 years later. I thought you had some sort of like mafia or, way to find these people. Talk about some of the things you did well and maybe talk about some of the lessons learned or things that maybe because times have changed, you do differently in 2020 than, 2015.
So one thing I always do is, there's like two things I try to do. Number one is be cognizant about the role that I'm actually looking for, the person I'm actually looking for, and have a clear understanding what they need to do like in the near future and in the midterm. It's very easy to come up with like, I need a full stack engineer to do full stack engineering, but that's not what you currently need. You currently have a very specific problem, or like a challenge that you might already have solved half step, but this is what you currently face, and try to get people who can help you with this and the logical future versions of this and the iterations of that. Because if you're unexperienced with hiring, that's much more easy for you to have a conversation around this than to about like some abstract philosophical problem or whatsoever, That's number one. So like being very aware what I'm actually looking for. And the number two I did, which I personally would also recommend, is trying to have a balance in your team. So you want people with different skill sets, I'm talking specifically now engineering, but this is true for the whole company, with different kinds of skills and interests and backgrounds. So that can mean, for example, you want some engineers who are really good and really like complex, hard engineering problems, and you want some that are that really understand the customer POV and really understand like the UX problems you face, but still can do a little bit of everything. You want some engineers who can help you with specific problems and whatever your core functionality or core infrastructure is. You want to have people who are really good in that aspect, and have this mix, and ideally have a mix that's overlapping. So don't have like this one person who can do your infrastructure. You have to have a setup where everybody can do a little bit of everything, but you have one or two people who are kind of the best and define how it should be done.
Totally. How do you know when you need to hire someone extra or versus when you don't need, like, how did you at Product Hunt determine this was the right size of the engineering team, or, hey, we need another hire for this? Or
in almost all cases, your productivity sucks and you don't need to hire more people. And I would go with that mindset. Just assume that you currently don't have the output that you could do and try to come to that output. Once you're like, kind of like, okay, we're now tackling stuff that we don't know how to do, try to tackle it. Meanwhile, try to hire people, because then you already understand the actual problem. Don't hire somebody for something you don't understand. Try to do it early on your own, or have somebody in your team you trust, have them do it, and then hire people once this gets too much or too complicated and so on and so on. Always assume that you are just underperforming right now. And once you see like work that can be isolated and problems that you're facing where you can dedicate like somebody, and you should dedicate somebody, try considering hiring around that. Always over-index on not hiring. That's like my biggest advice to anybody. It also forces your team to step up. And one thing that Naval told me, which I love as an expression and is so hard to do, and it sounds like a tweet that sounds amazing, is actually like an asshole thing to say, but it's kind of true. Fire good people to make space for great people. There's always, you have people join you as a part of their career. They will come to your company. They join you for like 1 year, 2 years, 3 years, 4 years. At some point, people will leave, and that's like just normal. And you should expect this anyway. And you should just like help them if they're like want to transition, happen transition. That's one aspect to this. The other aspect to this is at some point you might hit the point where this person, like it's not the right fit anymore what your company is doing. I'm not talking about your company is now growing that much or whatever. It's just like this person is a junior engineer. Early on, you had enough work for this kind of junior engineer. This person is it is, but this person isn't getting to the level what you currently need. You don't have the resources to staff that many people. You need to replace this person. That's completely normal and understandable, but do that early on. Like have this always like in your back of your mind, like, is this a person I would rehire? And if not, like replace a good person with a great person.
Anyone can take that tweet. It's open. Whoever takes it first. Andreas, talk more about what you did on the productivity side in terms of dividing up the work or best practices around making sure that you were getting the most output from your different inputs.
Yeah, there's 99% of that is management 101. Most problems you will face in your company have more to do with you than with your team. So that means things like if you struggle trusting your people that they do their work, that means you did something wrong. It means that you didn't set up the processes right. They don't know what to do. They don't know how to evaluate their work. The expectations are not clear. You don't have ways to define what is success, blah, 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 all this kind of stuff. Or they just don't know what this company is actually supposed to do because you change your mind every 3 weeks, So most of the problem you will face in your company and most of the productivity problems you face in a company will have to do with the founding team. And that's kind of the reality of that. You can think of it that way, saying like people times context is output, and you're in charge of the context. Your job is to make sure they have the context to actually succeed. And there's like million lines and books of advice on how to do that. Like read all of that, ignore all of that, pick the ones you think is right. You can anyway only succeed in your way, and you cannot succeed in somebody else's way. So just like consume all of that.
You mentioned 99% of his management, 101, sort of Andy Grove stuff and stuff that's emerged from that. Is there the 1% that's the, what's the Andreas-ism or something that's sort of unique to how you approach it?
Decision layering is one of the number one things I would look at. Is be sure, like early on, this is not so much a problem because everything, right? But it's still like, what is your responsibility as a founder? What is the responsibility of this other person, the other person, And think of it like, what decisions can you push down as much as possible? And we have this weird thinking of like a hierarchy within a company, which is like this, what is it called in English? The organigram of like the people, and the boss is in the top and everybody's in the bottom, In reality, the people in the bottom are doing the actual work and talking to the customers and they're handling the product. They know more about what should be done than the people above. The reason why we have this weird setup is because that's how communication usually works, and communication has complexity problems. One thing I would try is like in your head, flip this around and see how much of the decision making can you push to those people and what decision you should not push to them because that's just lazy. One thing I did once was like I taught this was like previous startup. I asked my marketing person to define the vision of the company because we needed one for the website. Imagine this person being now like joining like 2 weeks before, being completely stressed out about like, I don't fucking know what the vision of this company is. Like I can just write some random text here, And then she wrote some random text. I was like, this doesn't, no, I don't disagree. I disagree. You should write this differently, write this differently. This person freaked out, like completely freaked out. Understandable. Like that's not her job. And that's almost like a low stake thing, that's like just write a text for a homepage. Doesn't matter worst case, But a lot of us do this for a lot of other things because we go back to our comfort zones. So as a founder, if you're an engineer, you like coding, I noticed I always code if I don't try to face a real problem, Maybe you do the same. If you're a business-centric founder, you like to have meetings. You like to have dinners, maybe not now, but like in general, You like to talk to investors because that's fucking awesome and like you feel special and they make you feel like appreciated, Especially Erik, of course.
You like to go on Twitter, yeah.
But in reality, all of them are a waste of your time, most likely 99%, especially Erik, obviously. And so you do this because it's your comfort zone. I had a co-founder who was designer, who was like, we had like stress and he started like tuning our logo. Of course, it's his comfort zone, But as a founder, you don't have the luxury of always going back to your comfort zone. Like this is something you can let team members do from time to time, But as a founder, you don't have this luxury. So like think about like, am I doing this right now? Because if yes, you'd have this decision layering and it's currently broken. You're not doing the things that you should do and you push those things you don't want to do or basically non-done decisions you push to other people, and therefore like bring them into a bad situation. And that can mean you change your mind. That can mean you didn't make up your mind. Can mean you didn't figure out the product market fit or the sales. You ask somebody to do sales before you even know what the product is. This is something I did multiple times in my life,
Yeah.
You ask somebody to make marketing for your product before you have product market fit or retention, So you basically don't do your job, and now you ask other people to do their job, and they just struggle doing it. That if you want like the 1% Andreas advice is like, do your fucking job. That's my 1%.
Tweet that too. Comp. So especially if you do, contract to hire, how do you think about equity conversations? Do you have it early? Do you have it later? Comp in general for distribute hire.
Yeah, I suck in that. It's really, really hard. So if you struggle coming up with good comp across different regions and different talents, it's really hard. Everybody struggles with this. So I will tell you the beautiful version, and I will tell you the reality. Okay. So the beautiful version is look at, for example, the model that Buffer or GitLab are doing, have have a base salary brackets for each kind of role, and have regional multipliers and skill and talent and experience multipliers on top of that. There's a lot of people saying we pay equal to everybody everywhere. And if you look, most of those hire either not many people, or they only hire in the Western world reality, So there's some people who manage to still do it with global teams, and I appreciate that. But even those usually don't pay San Francisco salaries. They say we pay San Francisco salary and then pay a senior $130,000. That's not a senior salary in San Francisco, especially not for a really experienced senior. Base salaries, regional multipliers. This is and look at Buffer and GitLab, right? So now comes the reality part of that. You're a startup, fuck other people, fuck their compensation, fuck everything. You need to get this thing actually to work, So you want to pay fair, and that's important. You want to have it's much more about internal fairness and about the position that those people can actually focus on work, and that they can actually, let's say, have a comparable lifestyle to each other, If your company raises more money, increase the salaries, try to be market competitive and so on and so on. But quite frankly, quite honestly, you can't pay amazing salaries early on, and you shouldn't try to, in my personal opinion. I would, instead of hiring expensive people in San Francisco, which have to charge 100K, 150K plus, consider hiring talent in flyover states, Latin America, in Africa, in Europe. Consider hiring those people for 50 to 120K. And in most cases, you will have a fair salary in that range, and then discuss equity additionally, which is by itself an own discussion. So I would do that. So if I would, for example, right now start a new company, I would think of how low can I get this to be still fair to the people that join me? Because in the reality, the worst thing that can happen to them is that they trust you, they join you, and then afterwards they have they have 2 years on their CV of a company that nobody ever heard of, went nowhere, or 1 year of a company that went nowhere, is completely obvious failure because you just didn't manage your budget right and you didn't make this company succeed. And that's worse to them than having a lower salary, in my opinion.
Totally. And let's just double down on equity for a second. So what do you say to people who ask early on about it?
I don't have a good answer to that. I think you have a stronger answer to that than I do, because you have more market transparency. This is something I always struggle with. So if other people struggle with this as well, I feel you. Yeah,
totally. Yeah, and I don't have a great answer to it. I think it's easier to have different salary based on people leave. I think the equity argument isn't necessarily I think you can, if the person is just as good, I think you can. It's just a negotiation, really.
Yeah, I have the same POV. I'm more equity I would pay comparable to everybody, depending on their skill set. Salary I would pay comparable to the cost of living, and that doesn't make sense. I don't know, but that's how I emotionally think about this and how I would approach this. Another good thing about equity is you have vesting schedules. So if they don't work out, you can fire them, and all of that problem is solved. That being said, don't overpromise equity because it's almost impossible to afterwards renegotiate lower. It's easier to agree on something that you feel is a little bit too low and then give them a bump up if they step up. That's easier, than the other way around, which is I tried this once. Don't do that.
Yeah, totally. And the best practices for the contract work, is it just find a project that's somewhat meaningful, put a time, is it a week? Is it 2 weeks? Like, what are best practices around the contract work itself?
Depends on the stage you're at. What I would do is, you currently have a challenge that you might have already half solved, you might have a new challenge, something you really, really understand. Use this in your interviews to just gauge how people think about this. This is step one. And when you actually isolate contract, if you're really early, it doesn't need to be like a completely isolated project. It can be a core part of what you do, because you don't have the luxury of saying, you know what, you start a mobile app, we don't need it right now, but like whatever, right? You don't have this luxury. So it could be or should be a core part of what you do, and it gives them more responsibility early on. One big mistake that I did, which I would highly recommend being careful with, is if you are talking to people who are freelancers and contractors, they have an hourly rate. And that hourly rate is relative to the fact that they won't work the whole week, because clients only book them for like 2 days a week maybe, and then they have like 1 week of nothing because they didn't have a client. The hourly rate or daily rate usually tries to compensate for that. When you talk with somebody and say like, hey, we want to do this project with you, realistically, this is 1 month or 2 months, this won't, or like even if it's 2 weeks, try to agree on weekly or monthly salary that's comparable to a future full-time salary, then divide and multiply, like let's say 1.3 to be fair, and do that instead of multiplying the normal hourly rate. It sounds obvious, but I did it like multiple times. I didn't do it, and multiple times I had like freelancers afterwards saying, no, I want to stay freelancer because it's good money.
Yeah. How did you find your best distributed hires up, sort of, taking editorial liberty, like Rado and Vlado? Like, how did you, were these people obvious? Were they not obvious? Were they through your network? How did you find them?
So the best hires I did were like, number one is through network, which can mean previous companies I worked at and like people that I trust. And ideally people you worked with previously, like all of that is obvious, right? We hired one amazing engineer through actually going through our API. So at ProductCount, we had an API. And what I did is like I literally printed, like I exported the 300 developers that requested keys. And I went through everybody's GitHub and like online presence and just like passively, they didn't know that, but I just like looked at everybody of them, like, this is a person that would be awesome to talk to for a job, I don't know if you can do that. I know companies that do this with customers. So they're just like, hey, you're using our product. You seem amazing. Can we talk to you about like joining us? Maybe there's other ways to do that. Like, so I had a good experience with that. The other ones I had good experience were freelancers that were recommended to me, and then we just switched them to full-time. That was something, but that's I also had good experience with just general job posts and just like doing that funnel. The only problem you have with that is you will have a lot of inbound, and this inbound is something you have to work through, and that takes a lot of time, and like doing all these interviews takes a lot of time. Early on, I would try to avoid this by being aggressive on the filter through your network, because you suck in interviewing anyway. Like, let's be honest, like I suck in interview, and I'm doing this for years, and additionally you don't have the time for it anyway. So like try to focus on, like, try to create artificial filters early on. This is how I think about this.
What are one or two of the most important things that can make a poor interviewer into at least a good interviewer, or from good to great? Like what is the non-obvious thing there?
Okay, this sounds weird, but record the interviews, have a transcript, and afterwards read it again yourself. There's tools to do that actually. There's like MetaView.ai, for example. There's other tools, but worst case, just like do it like YouTube. Zoom offers all of that. Record it and transcript. It's something where you can just go back and look at the actual interview. And what you will notice is, like, a classic one is like an engineer talking to a female candidate and talking 90% of the time. And then afterwards writing something like, this person doesn't have strong opinions. That's super common. That's something you can do. Another one is being really, really aware what the role should do and ask them actual problems that you face and how they would tackle them. And have a good enough understanding about the problem that your bullshit sensor is like working, that when somebody is like talking nonsense, or talking stuff that you have tried that's obviously not working. That's the two things I would do.
Talk about, let's zoom out a little bit.
Mm-hmm.
What are the big debates that are happening right now in remote work or distributed work, and where do you find yourself on some, like, what are the most contrarian beliefs you have? We talked a little bit about private equity last time, but in terms of doing, building distributed companies well, what are the big debates and most contrarian beliefs you have on it?
I consider most of those discussions complete BS. Like, people have different preferences and they are like so hung up with their own opinion, like whatever. The big debates right now you have usually around asynchronous communication versus synchronous communication. How important is what? InVision has several hundred people all work on Eastern time. GitLab has several thousand, like 1,000 something people working all completely asynchronous. Doist is completely asynchronous to the point that they don't even have Zoom calls when they should have them sometimes. So there's like opinions about that, great. I think the answer is in the middle. Jesus, what a shock, right? The other big discussion is usually around salary. So should I pay everybody the same? Should I have like regional, blah, blah, blah? Again, the answer is like in the middle. You want to have competitive salaries because the best people you will talk to will expect international salary and not like Mexican, like I live in this little town, like salary, So they will expect an international salary, but international salary still is most likely lower than, for example, a San Francisco salary. So again, the answer is somewhere in the middle, My most contrarian take on remote work is like standing desks. Like Erik reached out to me because he thinks I'm an expert for remote work. That to me means like I'm an expert for standing desks. Here's a button, it goes up. Here's a button, it goes down. Yes, it has disadvantages. You need a power plug. It's very heavy. It's more expensive. You need to, maybe people can't get this in where they live. It's like not ideal for everybody. But in the end, it doesn't matter if your company has standing desks. This doesn't make your company succeed or not. So there's like, this is my most contrarian take. Like right now we have this big arc around remote work, which is pushed by San Francisco because they just realized there's more people in this world. They realized, holy shit, there's people outside of the Bay and even outside of America that have talent, and that have amazing projects to work on. And that is just like mind blowing, and that's happening right now. And additionally, we of course have like Corona going on, but that's my contrarian take.
So how would you reframe what your core expertise is then?
I'm good in making shit tweetable.
Me too.
Yeah, that's like literally my second core competence is like making people believe that I'm good in anything at all. And that's about it. Everything else is stuff that everybody else can do. It's just like take a problem, break it apart, and like, again, break those problems apart. Most problems you face are not complicated, they're complex. So you tackle complex problems different than complicated ones. You just break them apart, period, Everything else is nothing special or magic. Everything else is just having done something that somebody else hasn't done in the past and seeing if it works or not. But to be fair, that gives you like a head start of like maybe 2 years in reality, maybe 3 years if you specialize in some certain regions. But everybody who takes 3 years and just like goes really deep into something, learns a lot, or like Erik like talks to like literally every expert in the world, or reads like millions of books, or like just does their job well for 2 or 3 years, can easily overtake anybody else, So that's how I think about that.
Totally. I want to open it up in the last 5 minutes for maybe a couple questions. If anyone wants to ask a question, now is the time. Otherwise, I have a couple more I'll ask. I'll give 20 seconds.
If I may. So Andreas mentioned that, like one of the greatest ways to evaluate people you're hiring is basically hire them to do a contract. But before that, minimum, criteria to hire someone for that.
So my connection dropped again, but I will pretend that I heard the whole question. So you basically said, what's the minimum criteria for evaluating people before you get to the stage that you are willing to give them a project? Okay. So basically, let's say you have 10 candidates and you need to compare them, right? That's like a realistic scenario. Early on, go for seniority, like more experience. Doesn't need to be 5+ years, but it should be 1 or 2 years, Go for people who have experience with very, very similar products because they had like all the learnings. Go with people who have very similar tech stack. Take, if you can, something really unique and new, try to deconstruct your business into, let's say, a 2x2 grid and say, like, what are the aspects of our business? So it might be cabs, mobile apps, ride sharing, and maybe just like hypergrowth, and then that's Uber, Like that's like the 4 aspects. And maybe you can get people who worked in companies who did one of those building blocks if they didn't do all of them, and then hire them specifically because of that background. That's how I would evaluate them early on. If you still have too many people, give them, what I do is basically a take-home challenge where you define a super simple little thing that's very close to what you actually have as a challenge, as an actual product. Maybe like it's a simplified version of your product. Give it to them. Do like a few little things in there, like make a few things intentionally wrong, or have like some tests broken, or like little things that you care about that they should get but don't have to get. Give it to them and give them one simple challenge to do that. And like they should do that, get back to you when they have done it, evaluate, great. And then additionally, have a 1-hour call with them. Ideally, like have like your engineering lead should do that, but like have an engineering call with them and pair on the same code base they just worked on, now with a little bit more challenging task. And they should work on this while you feedback, help, whatever, but you work on this together and see how they actually tackle different problems that they will face in reality. So the concept here is like take home challenge and pair programming. And I would combine them, because one of the biggest problems you have with pair programming is you can't just give somebody something they haven't seen before and just say like, okay, now do that, and I watch you. That's super stressful. Combine those and you have a very good early filter. And that should get you from like, with these 2 things, you should easily get from like down to like 1 or 2 that you really consider. Can we quickly also jump into what kind of startups I would like to exist?
Yes, let's end with that, please.
Yeah, I feel like this is the right group.
Yes, request for startups, Andreas.
Is there anybody here like wants to start a startup? I don't know, a few people? Yeah, cool.
Everybody, man.
Okay, cool. So like me and Erik discussed this once, like the really big things right now in remote work is, in my opinion, obviously private equity, like buy companies, fire people, replace them with better people remote, optimize operations, have squads doing that, and buy the next company. I assume you don't have, let's say, several hundred millions or billions of a private equity fund behind you. And I will just skip this one idea and like move on to the next one. So there's short-term things that would need to be existing, and there's long-term things that need to be existing. Right now, we're in a situation where a lot of people have their normal business broken completely, but still need to make money to survive. How can you get those businesses online in a way that doesn't overwhelm them? I think there's multiple things that exist already, and many of them spaces are noisy. I get it, but maybe you can take maybe you can do a different take on some of those ideas. And friend of mine is a yoga teacher. She asked me for recommendations for what tools she should use to continue her classes. I had to send her 3 where I'm not even sure if she gets them, because they're like they look like overcomplicated, 2 which are not really what she needs, but okay. And another 2 or 3 which are I've never heard about, but apparently exist. So there's like still category winners in a lot of areas where you can win by having a better product, having a better customer understanding, and just do this properly. This is the oldest short term. And that can go from online education for kids, telehealth, getting retail online, getting coaching and training online, all this kind of stuff. This won't go away after Corona. And this is almost like the same thing as we had back then when Y Combinator started. A lot of the Y Combinator companies that started back then, they weren't the first one doing it. They weren't the best ones doing it. They just persisted and stayed along enough and then just grew casually over time and now are really big companies. And I think we would have the same now with remote. So while I love if everybody has like a completely unique, amazing new idea, feel free to also take something you care about and just like do it better and just like focus on that. That's number 1, short-term ideas. Long-term ideas, how I think about my fund. And also I think this is where the more the classic venture investing part comes in. There's 2 kinds of startups I invest in. One is improving startups that improve remote work. And the other one is startups that leverage remote work in a unique way. Improving remote work can mean the obvious ones, which are communication tools. Completely noisy space. Unless you have a fresh take, try to stay away from this. There's still people who will make new winners. Like Slack isn't the answer. Like there will be some asynchronous communication tool that has like a little bit of synchronous communication part in it that will beat Slack. I'm 100% sure about that. It will be closer to threads.com and Google Docs, maybe with a little bit of tandem, but this will beat Slack. That's for sure. You can try that. I'm the first person to invest if you have a good product. But in general, super noisy space, be careful. The other ones are global payroll, global benefits, all this kind of stuff. The problem you have with this is there's a limited set of categories that make sense to do global, and all of them require like really strong, complex operations. But there is still stuff that makes sense to just think about, what if I take something and now approach it on a global scale? This is another category. Another category here is remote teams in general are just a very attractive early stage customer. So maybe your tool isn't actually a remote tool, but you target remote teams early on because they have complexity needs compared to a bigger team, but are willing to just say, fuck this, I buy it, even if it's half done, because we need this right now. So consider maybe not doing like a tool for remote, but a normal SaaS company that makes sense in general for any digital knowledge company. But you start with remote teams as an early customer segment just to have a very good customer to start with. Another group I look at is, how does society change when more people work remote? What are the differences? How do villages, cities, hubs change? What are new opportunities for rural areas? I recently invested in a company that's focusing completely on rural economic development. There's a lot of stuff to be done in that area, but you should have obviously like a unique take on it and all this kind of stuff. So there's like multiple areas how you can deconstruct this. And one of the biggest problem I see when people think about startups that should exist because of remote work, they look at the problem they face every day, which is communication. The problem now is that everybody has the same problems. Everybody is looking at that and everybody's like, hey, you know what? Project management is hard. I will come up with my own project management tool. Hey, you know what? To-do lists are hard. I will come up with my own to-do list tool. You know what? Budgeting is hard. I come up with my own budgeting app. All of a sudden, you have like 5 million different remote communication tools. Try to avoid that and think a little bit more like second degree. What are the implications that indirectly come out of that? Because society won't change. Like, we will be more remote in future. This is not going away. We will work more online. We will more work internationally. We will hire amazing people in different parts of the world, and this will just become more normal. So think a little bit more second degree effects. Think a little bit more like what are things that where you have like early stage remote as customer, or think about people who didn't consider themselves as being selling online. What should they need to do to actually be able to sell online and solve one thing for them really well? Calendly right now has the time of their life, because it's a scheduling app where you can just schedule appointments. Everybody's like every teacher, meditator, or like coach I know right now is using that to keep their practice alive. Do one thing really well for these kind of people. And a part of that, listen to whatever Erik says, because he's the master and I'm the least experienced investor you will ever talk to. I'm also like the smallest fund you will ever talk to. So like listen to Erik. He's like the $100 billion fund expert with Mark Zuckerberg in his speed dial. Okay.
But big in our hearts, Andreas, big in our hearts. Another challenge of remote work is expressing appreciation. So I want everyone to unmute their mics and give Andreas a round of applause. Andreas, thank you for joining. Well done. Well synchronized. Andreas, thank you so much for coming on. This has been a lot of fun.
Cool. My email address is firstname@lastname.io, andreas@klinger.io. My Twitter is first name, last name. DMs are open. My fund is called remotefirstcapital.com. Everything quite straightforward, I guess. Ping me if I can help.
You'd be lucky to have him on your cap table and to have his time. And we're very grateful. Appreciate it, Andreas.
If you're an early stage entrepreneur, we'd love to hear from you. Check us out at villageglobal.vc.